Friday, August 8, 1969, film director Roman Polanski was in London working on The Day of the Dolphin. 5,000 miles away, a sweltering Los Angeles was blanketed by a brutal heat wave. At their Benedict Canyon home, Polanski's 8.5 months pregnant wife, Sharon Tate, was counting the days until the birth of their baby.
August 8th, I was supposed to go up there. Sharon was so miserable in the last stages of her pregnancy, and she said, sure, can we do it another time? And I said, absolutely.
Sharon did have some company that night. Her friend Jay Sebring was a regular visitor. She also had 2 house guests staying with her while Roman was away. 25-year-old coffee heiress Abigail Folger and her Polish boyfriend, 32-year-old Wojtek Frykowski. Frykowski was also a longtime friend of Polanski.
Sharon, Wojtek, Abigail, and Jay all went out to dinner that night.
The 4 came here to the El Coyote Mexican restaurant. Unbeknownst to them, this would be their last meal.
Left, I think, a little after 10:30. Got back to Cielo.
Meanwhile, a sinister plan was being hatched by Charles Manson at Spahn Ranch.
He told his family, we can ignite helter-skelter, start this war between blacks and whites by committing the murders ourselves.
Manson told Watson to go up to the house at 10,050 Cielo Drive and to kill everybody there.
Why that house?
The house was a symbol. It didn't matter who lived there. It was striking out at something that Melcher had been attached to.
He knew that Melcher was no longer living there.
Manson remained behind as Watson, Atkins, and Krenwinkel drove off in a ranch hand's car. Joining them on their mission of murder was a recent addition to the family, 19-year-old Linda Kasabian.
Linda Kasabian was a runaway. She had left home and was traveling around the country, and she wound up at the Manson Spahn Ranch.
Trisha, Krenwinkel, and Susan Atkins, and Tex, and myself were all in the car. And we're getting ready to leave. And Charlie came out and said something like, oh, you girls, leave a sign. You know what I mean, something witchy.
In her only television interview in 40 years, Linda Kasabian told Fox Television's Steve Dunleavy in 1988 about the savagery on Cielo.
Tex had some rope and wire cutters. And we got to a gate and he climbed up the telephone pole, cut the wires. Then we started going around the embankment where the gate was. And after we all got over to the other side, a car started coming towards us.
Stephen Parent, who'd been visiting William Garrettson, the caretaker, started driving his car toward the gate. Must have been terrified out of his mind. See these people in black climbing over the gate at midnight. Pulled his car to a stop, said, I won't say anything, don't hurt me.
A delivery boy from El Monte, California, 18-year-old Stephen Parent had just graduated from high school.
Watson shot him 4 times, 2 times in the face and a couple times in the chest, killing him.
In the house on the hill, nobody had heard a thing.
Abigail was reading a book. Wojtek sort of napped out on the couch in the living room. Sharon and Jay were sitting in the bedroom talking.
And then I was told to stay and watch, and the 3 of them continued on to the house.
They went into the house, rounded up Sharon and Jay, Abigail Folger, from her bedroom. When Tex Watson had entered the living room, Wojtek Frykowski was asleep. He woke up and sort of said, "Who are you?" And Watson said, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business."
I started hearing screaming, loud screaming.
When Jay Sebring tried to stop Tex Watson from manhandling a pregnant Sharon, Tex shot him. As Sebring lay dying, Tex kicked him several times in the head before stabbing him 7 times. Wojtek Frykowski, who put up a fierce fight, managed to get to the front door as Susan Atkins slashed his legs with a knife and Tex pummeled him with the butt of a gun.
I started walking towards the house, and next thing I know, a man comes stumbling out of the house, covered in blood, and falls down, and Tex starts stabbing him.
Do you remember what was going through your mind as you see Tex stabbing Wojtek Frykowski?
I remember looking up in the sky and realizing that Charlie was definitely the devil.
Frykowski lay dead on the front lawn, having been stabbed 51 times, bludgeoned with a gun 13 times, and shot twice.
And in the background, I see a white figure of a lady in a nightgown, and Patricia was on her, stabbing her.
Abigail Folger had also made it to the front lawn, but died after being stabbed 28 times by Patricia Krenwinkel and Tex Watson. The killers then turned their attention to a terrified Sharon Tate.
Sharon was the last to die. She was left alone in the living room with Atkins, begging, pleading, crying for her life, for the life of her unborn child.
Susan Atkins told poor Sharon, "Look, bitch, I don't have any mercy on you. You're going to die."
Tate was stabbed 16 times in her chest and back. Following Manson's order to leave a witchy sign, Susan Atkins used Sharon Tate's blood to scrawl the word pig on the house's front door. Then the killers fled. At 8 a.m. the next morning, the Polanski's maid, Winifred Chapman, arrived for work.
I lived at 10090 Cielo Drive.
Then 15 years old, Jim Asen was warming up the family car when the horrified maid came running down the street.
She was, horribly shaken. Blood and bodies, blood and, just screaming when she first came down. So I made a phone call down to the West LA station.
It was almost unbelievable because it was more like a slaughterhouse.
Lieutenant Robert Helder was put in charge of the investigation. In a 1990 interview, he recalled the search for a motive.
We started turning up small quantities of narcotics. There was some cocaine. So immediately you think up a drug connection.
16-year-old Deborah Tate was in the shower that morning when her mother rushed into the bathroom.
Mother flung the shower door open and said, "Sharon's dead." And I was fighting for the shower door back, and what are you talking about? And she collapsed.
That morning, the police took into custody the only survivor on the property, the caretaker, 19-year-old William Garretson.
He was at that stage the chief suspect.
No, he wasn't really termed a chief suspect. There was no blood in his quarters. Whoever did this had to be covered in blood themselves.
As the LAPD scoured Cielo Drive for clues, Manson decided there would be another night of murder. This time, he went along. Behind me at this home on Waverly Drive, 20 miles from the slaughter on Cielo, the Manson family struck again, butchering Lino and Rosemary LaBianca.
The second night, originally they were looking for the victims completely at random in Los Angeles. Eventually, they stopped in front of the home of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. They had been in that area before because there was a fellow who lived next door to the LaBiancas who was a friend of the family's.
44-year-old Lino LaBianca was the head of Gateway Markets, a small supermarket chain. Lino and his 38-year-old wife Rosemary had just returned from a weekend of boating when Manson slipped into their home.
He convinced Lino that if Lino cooperated, no harm would come to him. Tied Lino's hands behind his back with his leather thongs, and then he came back to the car and sent his killers in there.
This time, Watson and Krenwinkel were joined by 19-year-old Leslie Van Houten from Monrovia, California.
Leslie Van Houten had been the homecoming queen in her hometown, but she fell in with a young man who turned her on to drugs, and he brought her to Spahn Ranch.
The three slaughtered the couple. Lino LaBianca was stabbed 12 times with a knife and 14 times with a carving fork. The fork was left protruding from his abdomen and the knife was jabbed into his throat. The word war had been carved into his stomach. Rosemary LaBianca was stabbed 41 times. Death to pigs, rise, and a misspelled helter-skelter had been scribbled on the walls and refrigerator in the victim's blood.
The total stab wounds on these 2 nights of murders, 169.
2 nights of savagery, 7 dead bodies, and no suspects.
My initial feeling at that time was it was a copycat murder. There's just no way of connecting the people didn't run in the same circles. They didn't know each other.
On August 10th, Dr. Thomas Noguchi and his staff conducted autopsies on the Cielo Drive victims.
It's the only time in my career that I walked out of an autopsy room. It was when Dr. Noguchi cut Sharon Tate's stomach open and removed that baby. I had chills going down my spine. I just turned around and walked out.
A jailhouse confession breaks the Tate LaBianca murder investigation wide open when Summer of Evil returns.